I keep forgetting if I've talked about this in one of the Batman game playthroughs. So I keep, and plus I keep getting distracted from talking about it, so I'm not sure. So I'm just gonna get this out there now, just in case, so that it's out there and it's like out of my brain a little bit, right? I love talking about the like comparison between the comic book characters of Batman and the Punisher. Because superficially, it seems like these characters both have a lot in common, right? When you think about it. They both uh, originated from watching their family gunned down in front of them. That was the impetus, the catalyst for them becoming superheroes. They both utilize somewhat childish symbology in their arsenal. They both decide to wage a one-man war on the criminal element. A war that they both admit to being futile and ceaseless. They both admit that they will never be able to completely eradicate the concept of crime. And they both kind of get off on that idea a little bit to minor degrees. And they both have a very binary black and white view of good versus evil. And they both have debilitating psychological issues. So when you put them right next to each other and look at them from that perspective, it feels like they're basically the same character, with the only difference being Batman doesn't kill people and the Punisher does kill people. But the thing I find more interesting is the differences between them, because when you really put it under a microscope, these characters could not be further apart from each other. And it's really one of those things that's like, you know, for want of a nail. You know, if only the horseshoe had a nail, the horse would have been able to get to the fucking king to deliver a message to avert a war, all because we didn't have that fucking nail. So what's the key difference that all the other differences hang up on when you compare Bruce Wayne to Frank Castle? Bruce Wayne saw his parents die as a child. Frank Castle saw his wife and children die as a grown man. That's really what it comes down to. A child losing his support structure, his parental figures, his caregivers, and his role models, and a resource provider losing the people that he was supposed to take care of and protect. That is the core philosophical difference between the development of Batman and the development of the Punisher. Because I've posited this before, that Batman is basically psychologically crippled at the age of 8 years old. He is deep down in his heart of hearts, he is still that 8-year-old boy watching his parents gunned down right before his eyes. He's never gotten over it. He's never grown up. He's never emotionally matured. He is stunted in terms of his psychological development at that moment in time. And he has never gotten past it. No matter how much he learns, no matter how much he physically grows, he is still a child. And you see that supported in a lot of the adaptations of Batman's story, where he is kind of incapable of handling real adult problems. This is a issue you see raised with Spider-Man all the time, because he used to be a 16-year-old child in high school, but now he's an adult. But the writers don't know how to write him as an adult. They keep writing him like he's a 16-year-old child, even though the issues that a 30-year-old man and a 16-year-old high schooler have to deal with, and the mentality that they would have to take towards dealing with the world around them are incredibly different. Bruce Wayne doesn't have, for one thing, he's completely incapable of maintaining a healthy relationship with another human being. Even the people that he is the most closest to in the world, he sees them as allies in a war on crime. Yeah, I'm coming, hold on. He sees them as comrades, as brothers in arms. Barbara, Tim, Dick, even Jason Todd to a minor degree, and there's a lot of stories that go into Batman's feelings about Jason Todd. All of his his team members, he sees them as like war buddies, not as friends, not as a family member. Even his own son, he has an incredibly strained relationship with. The only person that he has a genuine, intimate emotional connection with is Alfred, who is a father figure. He raised him. Alfred raised Bruce Wayne, from childhood after his parents died, and so he's, the only human contact he has, and Alfred's still just his dad. There's no, it's not two adults, it's a father and son with a very vast, difference in their ability to, he's, Alfred just still nurtures Bruce Wayne. There's no equilibrium there. And if you, this is particularly true in the movies, but, it's actually in the movies, it's more jotted up to Bruce being too tired from running around as Batman, but he seems to have a complete lack of interest in running Wayne Tech, in running the Wayne Foundation, the business, the multi-billionaire conglomerate, Zaibatsu, that his parents formed. And it's pointed out a lot that Thomas and Martha Wayne did a lot more for Gotham City from the top down, using their funds and institutions to try and make life better than Batman has ever done in his one-man crusade against war from the street level. You can only go so far, and when you think about it, Batman, with the resources and mental acumen that Bruce Wayne has acquired in his career as Batman, he could be an immense, financial force. He could do so much with the Wayne Foundation, with the Wayne Tech, the company, to make life better. But he basically uses it as, a back fund to make new gadgets as Batman. And he has no interest in running it as a business. He leaves that to characters like Lucius Fox and other characters throughout the history of the comics. And it's always just kind of written off it kind of takes care of itself. He's running around as Batman. You can easily chalk that up as being a sign of his immaturity. He doesn't want to waste his time running a business, being an entrepreneur, although technically not really an entrepreneur because it's an inherited business from his parents. He wants to just run around dressed up like a bat in his pajamas beating up criminals. It's interesting to look at things from that perspective, right? That he's just completely emotionally shunted as a human being. So, obviously that's the core conceit behind Bruce Wayne's character. He's this child in the body of, a 30, 40-year-old man. And he's projecting this, immature fantasy onto this gritty reality. And the best writers are always ones who acknowledge the fact that Batman's kind of fucked up in the head. Dark Knight Returns, Killing Joke, really famous Batman stories that go hey, isn't he a little fucked up? He might be a little bit fucked up. Drawing parallels between his rogues gallery and him. Batman has probably the most famous rogues gallery in comics, second to Spider-Man. right? Which is another stark contrast to the Punisher, who doesn't have a rogues gallery. And that, like, is the first of many differences. Because Batman refuses to kill people, his villains just keep coming back. Punisher, obviously, kills his villains, so they're gotta come up with new ones all the time. That's one, and the other most fundamental important difference is Batman was created as a child. The Punisher, superficially, was created as an adult. Frank Castle was already a grown man by the time he became the Punisher. Instead of the loss of his family triggering this quest to go and train and become a superhero, Frank Castle was basically already who he was by the time that happened. He had all these skills, all this technical know-how, all this like natural intuition. Like he had all these qualities before he ever took up, the war on crime. And that, I think, like, really brings it down, because Batman is a character who is defined by a single event. He is defined by the tragic loss of his parents. Frank Castle isn't. Superficially, it appears that he is. It appears that, just like any other superhero, basically, the loss of the loved one inspired him to go on and learn all these skills and become a hero. But, like, the entire conceit behind him is that he had all of these life experiences. He went through everything that he went through and changed, and, like, he would have been fundamentally the same person regardless of whether or not his family died or not. And there's actually been a couple stories to that effect, where, whether or not his family died, things would have played out the same way. In spite of a nail, right? Whether or not the horseshoe had the nail or not, the message wouldn't have been, like, war would have happened anyway. It didn't matter whether his family died or not, because he was still Frank Castle. He was still the Punisher. Especially in Garth Ennis's portrayal, where Origin, which I've talked about, the Vietnam story, where he's, like, even before his family died, even back when he was still just a soldier in whatever Stan, because comics have to, like, keep moving up the timeline, which is so dumb, by the way. He was already fucked up in the head. He was already crazy. He was already, like, this bloodthirsty psycho-killing machine who just wanted to keep fighting and keep killing and keep warring for the rest of his life. And, like, his family was the trade. He traded his family for that war. But he wanted that war regardless. In a way, you could argue that his family was what was holding him back. And with them gone, he was liberated to become the Punisher. Although that's just one interpretation. As with any comic book character, there's all different kinds of interpretations. Like, these characters have existed for decades and have been written by dozens and hundreds of different writers who all have different interpretations and different stories to tell. In one interpretation, Captain America's a werewolf. In another interpretation, he was a sleeper agent for Hydra the whole time. They're basically completely different characters. That's why I really am not into Western comics anymore. In terms of, like, the long-running intellectual properties, I'm not into Amazing Spider-Man number 657, right? I like the individual self-contained stories that have a beginning, middle, and end, and were like singularly done by one guy. And then the next guy comes in and he has his story and he throws everything that came before out the window unless they want to, bank on nostalgia and remembrance of a famous old story so that they can get their hack, shitty version of it out there. Anyway, comics are always like really complicated. That there are many interpretations of Frank Castle where he was, a happy father figure guy. Still, he's always like a soldier beforehand. He was always a killer before that, but whether or not he was a well-adjusted person or not is kind of what gets changed. Like with Batman being a crazy person, my preferred interpretation of Frank Castle is that he was always kind of unhinged. And when you think about it, that actually draws parallels between him and the Joker. If you remember in The Dark Knight, the Joker talked about, like, all it takes is one little push to send someone over the edge and turn them into me. And that also was always a popular interpretation of the Joker, with the killing joke, obviously. All it takes is one bad day. And Frank Castle had the worst day. And in the Max series, which is also by Garth Ennis, and was like kind of Frank Castle's own removed storyline, where he was allowed to like age normally, there's this whole chapter that talks about how when he was a child, he went to a poetry reading, and he heard a poem about like a tiger who was some sick badass tiger, and it inspired him to learn more about the animal kingdom and the killing practices of predators in the animal kingdom. And that gets reincorporated into his career as the Punisher. He brings that knowledge back and uses it in his war. And obviously, the other key difference is Batman refuses to kill people. Frank Castle exclusively kills people. Like, sometimes he kills people who arguably don't even deserve it. Like, he's just a total asshole. It's a complete stark, like, black and white, black shirt, white skull, bad dudes get killed, criminals die, the end. The Daredevil show actually had the best, like, kind of synopsis of his whole core ethos, where he's like, you hit them, you knock them down, they get right back up. I knock them down, they stay down. They can't ever hurt anyone again. Because he doesn't think people can change. That's really one of the fundamental differences between their philosophy, is Batman does believe that people can change. And in a way, he gets proven right, because I think Batman has the most villains in his repertoire that used to be allies. Like, Harvey Dent Two-Face is the most obvious example, where Harvey Dent used to be a good guy in all of his interpretation. That's a failing of The Dark Knight, by the way. That's like, a lot of my problems with The Dark Knight is it doesn't really capture the true essence of these characters. Like, it gets the philosophy. It gets the philosophy of flip the coin, I don't have to make the decision. It's left up to fate of Two-Face. It gets that. It gets the anarchy, crazy, but there's a method to his madness, order versus chaos dynamic of Batman and the Joker. And, like, it really nails a good, intriguing interpretation of the Joker, but there's only so much it can do in a limited runtime. It has an hour, 2 hours and change to tell a very specific, narrow, focused, laser-pointed story. It doesn't have the decades and decades and decades of history between these characters to really, like, flesh out. Because Harvey Dent was a huge character in the comics back in the day. Like, he was kind of a big thing. Like, he was like Bruce Wayne, Commissioner Gordon, Harvey Dent. That was like the trifecta of like Gotham's like law enforcement kind of thing. The police figure, the attorney who like law and order, right? And then Batman, who's the vigilante element that a cesspool like Gotham City needs because the system has become too corrupted over time. And so you need that external element to shake it up. So when they decided, hey, let's make Harvey Dent a villain, that was like one of those things that was like, what? Harvey Dent? People who were in the know, you know, because like casual audience, obviously they didn't know, but you know, that was a shake-up kind of event. But you don't have that in Dark Knight Returns. You have like first two acts of the movie, it's Harvey Dent, and you see he's the White Knight, and then the incident happens, and he gets his face burned off, and then he becomes Two-Face, right? It doesn't go into the idea of the split personality, because that was always a thing, especially in the animated TV series where they really had the runtime to stretch out that relationship, where it was Harvey Dent and then the Two-Face persona, who was always a dark and twisted element in his psyche. And the trauma of the attack that scarred him is what pushed him over the edge. Two-Face is genuinely insane. He genuinely has a psychological disorder. That's another big thing. All of Batman's good stories go into the psychological issues. Batman's fucked up. Joker is implied to actually be sane, but is like mocking the concept of sanity. And Two-Face genuinely has like a legit psychological disorder of dissociative identity disorder. And whereas Punisher is also really fucked up, but in a much more like externalized way. He has a lot of self-loathing about himself. In a way, he's a lot more honest with his issues than Batman is. And that stems from Batman being inherently mature, whereas the Punisher has the life experience and maturity to self-reflect. Batman does not self-reflect. He doesn't have the wisdom to look inwards. Punisher does. Frank Castle does. He looks at himself and he really like holds himself to a standard that he lives up to. But there's this great moment where like Ghost Rider tries to do the penance stare on Punisher, which is like his superpower where he makes people confront their sins and like they're destroyed by their own guilt, basically. And he does it on Punisher, and nothing happens. And he's like, I regret nothing. Like, everything I've done. He is so absolute. He's so self-assured. He has the fullest confidence that what he's doing is the right thing to do. And there's also, like, sometimes little hints that he doesn't think he deserves to live in that world. He can only exist in the cesspool, in the war. He can't have peace. He's a soldier who can never live in peace. It reminds me of in the Firefly movie Serenity, the bad guy in that movie, he was like, I'm unnecessary evil, and I need to pave the way for like paradise. But he's like, I don't belong in that world. I'm not going to live there. I'm a monster. But I'm doing what I have to do to make that world a reality. To make this dream of utopia, like, come true. But it's not for me. Characters like that are really fun. Like, B.J. Blazkowicz in Wolfenstein also has that mentality where he's like, his girlfriend's like, I believe there's still a place where people like you and me can live and be happy. And he's like, I believe that too, but that's not where we will be. That's not where we're gonna go. Not for me and not for you. And that's kind of Frank Castle's ethos. He's like, this is where I live. And when it's over, there'll be one more check to balance. I think that's like a famous Punisher line where he's like, when the war is finished, when crime is eradicated, one more to go. One more grave to fill. Not so that he can be happy and at peace with his family at last, but because he knows he's just as much of a monster as anyone else he's dealt with. When like one mob boss he's killing, she's like, "You're fucking crazy. You're just as bad as I am." Blah blah blah. He's like, "Tell me something I don't know." So, like, again, superficially, a lot of comparisons, but when you really actually get into it and analyze the philosophies and mentality of the characters, there's a lot where it's like, no, these are complete, like, it's sort of like, it's like two sides of the same coin. Where Batman is very immature and, like, the idea of dressing up like a bat and going on a non-lethal crusade against crime, and you'll use your family's like endless supply of wealth in order to make new cool gadgets. That's a really childish way to look at the world. Ignoring, obviously, the reason he has that mentality is because he's a comic book character, and the purpose is he's a character who's written targeting adolescent boys to sell merchandise. That's not what we're talking about. Whereas the Punisher is an adult who's like, I'm going to fucking kill all of these bad guys with my guns, and I don't have a cool car. I'm just gonna go and do whatever I gotta do with what I got. And he doesn't have this endless supply of resources. He's just got fucking, like, guns. Lots of guns from fucking criminals he kills. He takes their guns, and then he uses those guns to kill more criminals. And that's it. That's all he does. He doesn't have sidekicks. He doesn't have a Gotham City. He lives in New York. That's getting into the differences between DC and Marvel as companies, as storytelling devices. But yeah, in case I've never talked about it before, I talked about it now just to get my thoughts out there. The difference between Batman and the Punisher, and, the comparisons and the contrasts are really fun stuff to talk about. Make another Punisher game. That'd be so fun. Come on.